My name is Marina, and today I'm going to teach you the basics of how to shoot in manual mode. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using this camera. It's a DSLR Nikon D40 camera. Shooting in manual mode ultimately gives the photographer way more creativity and control over other work. Manual mode gives the photographer greater creativity because it allows them to shoot and capture images that are otherwise not possible in auto mode or with any of its other presets. Just to note, for the entirety of this video, you're going to want to turn your mode dial from auto to M for manual. Also, when shooting in manual mode, pressing the info button will show the different settings that are available in this mode on your screen. The most important thing to keep track of while shooting in this mode is going to be your light meter. It gauges your exposure before you even begin to take your photos. Ideally, good exposure is measured by a reading of 0. Any readings on the plus side indicate overexposed settings, and readings on the minus side indicate underexposed settings. So there are 3 ways that you can change the exposure while shooting in manual mode: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Aperture describes the size of the lens opening. Much like the pupil of your eye, your aperture can be dilated in order to increase or decrease how much light enters the camera. Increasing the aperture or increasing the size of the hole where the light enters the camera will allow more light in, and closing that aperture or shrinking it will allow less light in. In order to change the aperture on my camera, I have to hold down this plus or minus button while turning this dial clockwise or counterclockwise. By turning it counterclockwise, I am increasing my aperture, which is actually decreasing the size of the opening where light will enter the camera. By turning that same dial clockwise, my aperture is decreasing, which means that the size of the opening is increasing. Shutter speed can also affect exposure. Shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter over the camera sensor will remain open before closing. Shutter speed can affect how much light hits the sensor and how movement is captured. The slower the shutter speed, the more light that can enter the camera and be captured by the sensor, and the faster the shutter speed, the less light that enters the camera. Shutter speed is also critical in capturing movement, as a very fast shutter speed will allow objects in motion to be captured in a freeze frame, while very slow shutter speeds can capture movement in a blur, otherwise known as motion blur. In order to change the shutter speed on my camera, all I have to do is turn this dial. By turning it counterclockwise, I am increasing my shutter speed, which means the shutter will close at a faster rate. Currently, it is shooting at 1/500th of a second. By turning it clockwise, I'm decreasing my shutter speed or having my shutter close at a slower rate. For example, I'm currently shooting at 1/50th of a second. The final setting we're going to be talking about in this video is ISO. Much like aperture and shutter speed, ISO can also affect the exposure. ISO represents the sensitivity of the digital sensor in your camera. The digital sensor is what captures and registers the visual information of your photo. Lower ISOs, values ranging from 400 to 200, mean that your sensor will be less sensitive to light, and higher values of ISO ranging from 800 and above means that your sensor will be more sensitive to light. Please note, however, that shooting with any ISO above 800 may cause some graininess to appear in your photos. In order to change the ISO on my camera, I can navigate to the menu button, select ISO sensitivity from the shooting menu, and scroll down. Today I'm going to shoot in ISO 400. Just click OK and return to the info menu, and you can see your current ISO on the sidebar. Now that you've learned the 3 primary settings that you can use when shooting in manual mode, here is a summary of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. This diagram can help you achieve your ideal exposure when shooting your own photos. Understanding aperture, shutter speed, and ISO is critical when shooting in manual mode, as they help control exposure, depth of field, motion capture, and more. Having control over these aspects of your photos gives you more creative freedom and is one of the reasons why I've grown to love manual mode. I hope that this video inspires anyone with a camera to experiment with this mode and practice using these tools in their own photos. Hope you enjoyed.